Good evening, everyone. So, yes, we're going to start off. I was going to actually start off with Jeremy Hunt's latest bizarre statement, which we'll get onto inevitably, I suppose. But I couldn't help this one. This was a poll done. It was by York Dungeons, which is worth a visit if people ever find themselves in York and haven't been there. Um, they, they ran a poll for which Briton would visitors most like to see locked up in the York dungeons, and Boris Johnson came first, with Prince Andrew second, and then Katie Hopkins. And I have to say, Prince Andrew was not a close second. Boris Johnson was well ahead. Boris Johnson got 67% more votes than Prince Andrew. He got 20% of all the votes, so 1 in 5 of everyone every visitor to the York Dungeons who took part in this poll wanted Boris Johnson in there, and it's an indication of where we are with politics in this country at the moment. There's been quite a few articles recently just about how little trust there is in politics. The York Dungeons did say that the person who has actually been incarcerated in dungeons, that the public would most like to sort of retrospectively release is Guy Fawkes, which is telling in itself. But yeah, the Boris Johnson 20%, Prince Andrew 12% of the votes, Katie Hopkins 7%, Piers Morgan was 4th. But so Boris Johnson, I mean, and again, yeah, okay, you can say that's 20%. Maybe the other 80% all think he's marvellous, but we know that's not true. We know that's not true. I heard he's hired O.J. Simpson's lawyers. He might need them. Well, someone mentioned the legal term. So for those who don't know, Boris Johnson has been getting taxpayer-funded legal aid, basically, worth an absolute fortune, to defend his interests in both the Privileges Committee inquiry as well as the general COVID inquiry. And because these lawyers basically were clients of the Cabinet Office, they turned over all the stuff he'd handed to them to use in his defence. They obviously sent to the Cabinet Office. So the Cabinet Office had a look through it and found in his diary evidence of purely social lockdown parties at both Chequers and Downing Street. So Boris Johnson had a bit of a tissy, he had a hissy fit. And then he went, my lawyers, you should have done that, you little rascals. I'm going to sack them. So he sacked the government appointed lawyers, which should mean that he pays for his own. If he wants to take on his own too, you can pay for them then. Now you're going to pay for them, but you're going to be using more expensive lawyers now. Yes, you're going to pay for them still, which is absolutely outrageous. And it should be stopped. I think someone said, I hadn't seen this. Yeah, Phil saying, suggesting that Johnson's new legal team would cost the taxpayer £1 million. It's already cost £250,000. And he doesn't even qualify for legal aid. He's too wealthy. Wendy asking, I love the bits of Starmer's NHS speech. Is it doable? It better be doable. The thing is, the Conservatives really shouldn't get away with making promises, not keeping them, and then making the same promises at the next election, which they keep doing. Do you know what Stephen Barclay, the health secretary, has been saying today on Twitter? We're going to build 40 new hospitals by 2030. Like, pull the other one. You said you were going to build them by now. We were supposed to have 40 new hospitals. It was in the last manifesto. No, it's going to be in the next manifesto now. Well, you shouldn't be able to do that. That shouldn't work. People should say, you promised it, you deliver it. If you can't deliver it, why should I believe you the next time you say it? So Labour making their NHS pledges, which are fairly challenging, I would think, they must have a plan for it, because although the Conservatives, because they have so much backing in the media, will get away with not keeping promises, Labour won't. They will absolutely hold Labour's feet to the fire come the next election if they haven't met. If there's any manifesto promises that haven't been met, the media will be all over it. All over. And it will make no difference, or it'll make little difference, shall we say, to Labour if they can say, well, at least we've improved it. Because it'll be like, well, no, hang on, you promised this. You won the election promising this. You keep to that. So, yes, Labour will presumably absolutely have a plan for delivering it. But I'm sort of in that phase at the moment with, like, because there's so many people going, oh, Labour don't stand for anything. Labour aren't doing anything. They haven't got any policies. And I'm just looking at it going, okay, right. I'm just at this point, Labour are going to win the next election. They're going to win. They're going to get their majority. They're going to have the chance to put it all into place. I'm at the moment just in the zone of just let it happen. Let it happen. Then a few years down the line, either Labour won't do anything, which would be remarkable because it's the first time a Labour government actually haven't done anything, or they will do, and then I can just get my I told you so banner out. Actually, do you know, it's always very dangerous to get yourself into a position where I get to say I told you so, because I don't let it go. I got to say I told you so to my partner this week. And do you know what I did? I got an I told you so cake for her. Because I take things to extremes at times. It's a cake with I told you so cake topper on it. There for prosperity. Uncle Social saying, just returned from a week in Belgium. What's been happening? If you've just returned from a week in Belgium, did you not get a bit stuck in customs? In passport control. There's been a bit of a problem. But anyway. Can we do a Blackadder? Since this is so clear in open and shut case, can Johnson's lawyers be fined for just turning up for time wasting? Yeah, I mean, obviously, we haven't seen the evidence. Boris Johnson is insisting that, it's all nonsense, all this stuff. And he says he hasn't seen it. There was a journalist caught him at the airport because he was coming back into the country from America. Caught him at the airport. And they said, and he said, I don't even know what this is about. I haven't seen anything, but it's all rubbish. I said, well, if you haven't seen it, how do you know it's all rubbish then? Huh? So, but the diary entry has been sent to the police. He's insisting it's all a nonsense. And yet his sister and Jacob Rees-Mogg have basically confirmed it. Oh, yeah, we went to this party. Oh, of course, we went there all the time. Jacob Rees-Mogg said, I took my family. My son bowled Boris Johnson out middle stump. Well, that sounds like a work do, doesn't it? The family Rees-Mogg going along for a game of cricket. Oh, yeah, during lockdown. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That must have been essential for the purposes of work. I mean, again, I just say, you know, with friends like those, who needs enemies? His own sister and one of his closest political allies grassed him up. Instead of thinking to themselves, let's just stay stum and say we don't know anything about it, don't know what they're talking about. What are they talking about? They've basically put themselves in the frame for a fine. The police should be investigating Boris Johnson's sister and Jacob Rees-Mogg and his family. I don't suppose they can find the minors, the under-16s. But if, you know, I think he's got a kid who's older. But they could certainly find Rees-Mogg, maybe his wife, if she went along as well. They can certainly find his sister, as long as the diary entry sort of indicates that they went during lockdown. But they seem to be happy to say they went during lockdown. Tory Civil War news. Oh, the Tory... All right, yeah, the latest... Because you might... Yes, ask. Every day there's a new one, isn't there? Every day. The latest Tory Civil War news is that the some wanting Oliver Dowden to be sacked. Why, you may ask? Because he is, at the moment, sort of in charge of the Cabinet Office, I think. And it's the Cabinet Office that handed over Boris Johnson's diaries to the police. So Oliver Dowden, the little tinker, he's got our Boris into trouble. We must sack him. Sack him. So that is the latest blue on blue action. There's another one as well. Actually, that was yesterday, technically. There's another one today, which is attacking Rishi Sunak for calling Boris Johnson's social care scheme crap. I need to read that one more fully. I think that one was in the is it Telegraph or the Daily Mail? I've forgotten now. These days, they're far too similar. But they're having a pop at Rishi Sunak for blocking Boris Johnson's social care plan. Because you'll say at the moment, so the Conservatives are going to go into the next election with no social care plan. And Boris Johnson says, well, Boris had a plan. No, he didn't have a plan. He said he did. But it's like everything else. There was no plan. But apparently they're having a pop at Sunak for blocking it. And Sunak allegedly said it was a crap plan. It was a crap plan. I don't know what the plan was. There wasn't a plan, actually. But if there was a plan, it was a crap plan. Because as I keep pointing out, Boris Johnson had this is the style of Boris Johnson's plans, right? So do you remember that first plan Boris Johnson had for a land bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland, right? Do you remember that? And people went, well, hang on a minute, Prime Minister. There's a crap load of wartime munitions in the sea where you're planning on building this bridge across. And he went, oh, right. It could be quite dangerous, you see, Prime Minister, trying to build something there. Right, I see. I'll tell you what, we'll have a tunnel instead. It's like, yeah, Prime Minister, the bombs are still there. It doesn't matter whether you go over them or under them. They're still there. And if we build near them, boom, big boom. All right, okay, all right. I'll tell you what, I've got another idea. We'll build a tunnel from northwest England to Ireland. Right? There's not actually a lot of traffic goes across there, by the way. We get ferries, but okay. Why? Well, because then we could build this big roundabout underneath the Isle of Man, have all these connecting tunnels. So he has in his mind, like building... I mean, how much trouble do we get even building new roads these days? He wants to build not just like one channel tunnel. He wanted to build multiple tunnels under the Irish Sea with a big exchange, a roundabout underneath the Isle of Man. That's the level of Boris Johnson's schemes. That's where he comes from. Oh, hello, Brian. Oh, you're going all French on me. I was never really good at French. I was much better at German, but I'm rubbish at everything now. But anyway, right, I'm going to try and catch up with some comments here. Alan say, I was listening to LBC last week and people said they just wanted this to end. They just don't get the point that he cherry-picked what he wanted to pass on, lied again and again. Oh, the Boris Johnson thing. Do you know what? I don't blame them. I mean, it's quite bizarre. I mean, you know, I've made a living now being a political commentator. Scandals are the bread and butter of political commentary, really, aren't they? You know, it was like, I remember David Alan Green, who's a constitutional legal expert, and he's been saying over the last few years, you know, constitutional law shouldn't be exciting. But particularly in 2019 and 2020, he said it shouldn't be. Shouldn't be exciting. It's a bad sign if it's exciting, if people are interested in it. It should be boring. And it's sort of, there's always little, you know, scandals and so on in politics, probably enough to keep political commentators in business. We'll soon find out when politics normalises. But something like Boris Johnson, you ordinarily think is a gift. It's a gift, but I'm sick of it now. I am honestly sick of it. So I can well imagine that ordinary members of the public who are not that interested in politics are probably sick of it. It's like, he is no longer the Prime Minister. Like, his allies go, oh, he's still really popular. No, he isn't. He's just been voted the person. He got 67% more votes than a royal nonce for being locked away in a dungeon, for goodness sake. He got 3 times as many votes as Katie Hopkins. She's so unpopular, even Twitter won't have anything to do with her. 5 times as many votes as Piers Morgan. You know, Boris Johnson is not remotely popular. Deeply unpopular. He really shat the bed with Partygate. Like, really did. And people are just sick of it. And it's just more and more. And do you know what? There'll still be more to come. There'll be more. The COVID inquiry will reveal more. Over the following years, will reveal more. But anyway, bridge over troubled water. It would have been very troubled water. Uncle Social saying, so when I came back through the tunnel, there were no problems getting through customs. However, on the M20, there's a massive queue of lorries on the road to Dover waiting for a ferry. Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, there were multiple problems with this IT failure. There were problems with the e-gates at airports, which was a bit of a problem both ways. Then there were problems at Dover for getting out. Because again, you know, loads of people going on holiday. It's not just that it's the Maybank holiday. It's the first school break where, I mean, Easter's the second school break where people want to actually go away for a bit, for a few days, take the kids to the continent, flee the sheep-infested island. Only they can't get out, and that's something that will actually. That's one of the real things. Rejoiners need to push, because that sort of thing will really piss off the public about Brexit. You know, the people seem to have got used to the crap food now, the lack of choice, the food that's not really fresh, the fact that you can go there and stuff you used to be able to definitely get, you have to go around several supermarkets. It all costs a lot more. You know, it's some things have gone up 50% or more since Brexit. And, you know, you look at all the crap we've got, but being stuck in a queue, trying to get out, trying to go on holiday. Going on holiday is always stressful. Being on holiday for a lot of people is what they want to do. But the actual going on holiday is always stressful. So you add extra delays to that and it just it just pisses people off. You tell them it's because of Brexit. That's what we need to just do all the time. By the way, if it weren't for Brexit, it wouldn't take this long. Even if something goes wrong, like an IT failure, it'll be still like, yeah, but all you had to do was prove you were an EU citizen. Like in other countries, you don't even need the passport. They'll have a national identity card. We don't have a national identity card, so we need the passport. But that's all it was. It was, is this your passport? Yeah, it is. Is it an EU passport? Yeah, on you go. That was it. No checking for dates. No check. Oh, this expires in 2.5 months. Yeah, what's wrong with that? No. None of this. Oh, you've been to the EU already for like 90 days in the last 180. Yeah, I want to go again. No, sorry, not allowed. None of that. None of this. Okay, it seems fine. You're allowed to go. Can I go down? No, you can't go yet. I've got to get my stamp. Let me get my stamp. There we go. Bang. Now you can go. And you times that by all the tens of thousands of people trying to get through. Or at Dover, you know, I don't know how many on a busy day, many thousands on a busy day. But through places like Heathrow, tens of thousands, like over 100. The average is about 120 to 130,000 a day. That's the average across the whole year. So at like a really busy day, I don't even know. Absolute madness. Madness. Brian saying, French citizen now lived in France 20 years, love it. There you go. I would miss the fish and chips. Although I'm even losing the fish and chips by the sounds of it. I have to do my own. Actually, I can do my own chips really well. I'm not very good at fish. But although my batter's very good. I do very good beer batter. But I'm not so great at frying the fish. Maybe it's probably because I just have a chip pan. I don't really have a pan big enough to do the fish properly. But the point is that apparently now potatoes are getting so expensive. I mean, it's already a problem for fish and chip shops because of the cost of energy. So prices have had to go up quite a lot. You know, fish and chips used to be quite cheap. I mean, we used to have the phrase cheap as chips. Fish and chips was the thing you went out for a nice cheap tea. You know, ordinary families, just normal working families on a pretty low wage could just have fish and chips today. It didn't cost very much when I was a lad. Now it's actually really expensive. It is actually not. It's not even the cheapest takeaway you can get. But apparently now the potatoes are just costing so much that there's fish and chip shops talking about having to go out of business because they will not be able to raise their prices enough to compensate because people won't be able to afford it because, you know, fish and chips is just one of those things. With regards to your midday video, the FT was a Labour supporting pay from 92 to 2010. It hasn't been since. It has not been since. Even at the last election, So at the last election, Boris Johnson, like all politicians will claim, oh yeah, our spending promises all add up. In a way, there's a sense in which they never really do because, or at least you can't be that confident because it's always based on, you know, this will be our tax tax system, and it'll generate this much tax revenue. It's always like, well, you're not entirely sure if it will or it won't. But Boris Johnson's was clearly unworkable. He was basically promising more investment and lower taxes, which just straight away, it's like, well, where's that going to come from? Oh, efficiency. Actually, no, usually they'll say efficiencies. In that case, he said Brexit. Oh, Brexit will do it. And obviously, any economist who wasn't just a liar would go, yeah, Brexit's actually going to hurt the economy. So everyone knew that Boris Johnson's spending plans did not add up. Now, the way the Financial Times treated it, instead of, and the Times did the same, but the Financial Times particularly, instead of them saying, this is clearly unworkable, he's talking about increasing spending and reducing taxes. Only a child would believe this. It's going to mean loads of extra borrowing, or he's going to renege on some of his promises. That's what they should have said. What did they say instead? They said, this looks a bit tight. It looks a bit tricky to be able to do this without raising taxes or more borrowing. That's what they said. They said, this looks tricky unless he raises taxes or borrowing. Instead of saying, but that gives room for you to think, okay, it's fine. You're just saying you can't see how, but he's got a plan. They should have said, this is going to mean higher taxes when he's promising lower taxes, or higher borrowing. That's what it's going to mean. Because that's what they did with Jeremy Corbyn's. In fact, the Financial Times actually told a bit of a fib with Jeremy Corbyn's spending plans, which were actually better costed. They actually lumped on an extra amount onto his spending plans that didn't exist. And they did have to admit later on that it basically just added it on. So they certainly have not. So when I talk about the Financial Times basically backing the Tories, I don't mean that they take a view in one election that maybe Labour are better in another election. They will back whoever they think is best for investors. And even under Boris Johnson, they thought that was the Conservative Party rather than Jeremy Corbyn. And they were probably right. And yes, Emma, I will have missed your comment, sorry. Saturday we get them coming thick and fast. The reported cost per kilogram of spuds in sacks to chip shops was higher than the cost in small 2.5 kilogram bags in supermarkets. That's insane. Why do I not think that the more sensible Tories are trying to lose the next general election? I don't think any Conservative... I think there are some Conservatives who are actually comfortable with losing the next general election. The ones who want to take over the party again. Suella Braverman, I think, is wanting a Conservative loss so that she can become leader. Or so she thinks. Most of them, the sensible ones, of course, do not want to lose. They don't want to lose. It's just that they are either too stupid or too powerless to do anything else. Some of them can be quite sensible in some areas and they're not others. But ultimately, in order to have any chance of winning the next election, Rishi Sunak has to make some real progress on both the economy and the NHS. And he's trying to break up the NHS. He's trying to sell it off or give it away. I say sell it off. I shouldn't say sell it off. Give it away. He sort of basically already has. It's just a case of finishing it off. But in terms of the economy, I'll go back to that Jeremy Hunt thing now. So Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, his latest thing is, I support these rising interest rates to tackle inflation, even if it means a recession. Who the hell in government is comfortable having a recession just before the general election? What sort of lunatic does that? And the other thing is that would, of course, break Rishi Sunak's pledge. Because a recession, by definition, means your economy is shrinking. Your economy can shrink without it being a recession. A recession's a bad shrinkage. So it's who wants that? Who on earth wants that? So no, I don't think they're trying to lose. I just don't... They don't know how to... Well, they do know how to win, But to win, the only way to do it is they need more. They need to boost the economy. What's the number one issue constraining our economy, apart from Brexit, because they can't do anything about that now? What is the number one? And I know it's them that did it, but what's the number one issue? Labour. We haven't got a Labour government, I could say, but workers. We don't have enough workers. This is one of my videos for tomorrow straight away. In the last couple of, do you know, after those immigration figures, immigration's too high, we need to bring down the immigration, these figures are a disgrace, we're ashamed of them. Ashamed, we say. And then what do? They announce that they're going to increase the number of visas for foreign fishermen, and they're going to offer £10,000 golden hellos for foreign teachers. So it's like, yeah, we need to bring immigration down. What's the first policies they announce after that? We're going to increase immigration. They're not serious at all, are they? They're completely trapped in their nonsense. So if there are any sensible Tories, they're completely trapped in on an insensible party. But I'm not really sure there are any sensible Tories at this point in time. Sensible Tories tend to be the ones who benefit when Labour have just been in power. So Labour have got public services in good shape, which means that those so-called sensible Tories can then start to abuse the economy without it creating massive seismic effects, because the infrastructure's there, but all they're doing is chipping away at it. And then you get 13 years later, then the infrastructure's no longer there. They haven't been maintaining it. They haven't been modernising it. So it's knackered. So at the moment, there is no sensible Tory policy, because the only sensible policies at the moment are taking away tax breaks for the wealthy and the corporations and the wealthy individuals, taking away the tax breaks, clamping down on tax avoidance schemes. If we cannot get more tax revenues from growth, and at the moment we're not doing anything to stimulate growth, so we're going to have to generate more taxes elsewhere. Take away the tax breaks, take away the tax avoidance schemes, or at least nobble some of them to generate more tax. Because you can't just keep loading up tax on the poorest. It doesn't work. Because apart from anything else, they're then not going to consume, which means your economy carries on struggling. The best way, if you're going to give tax breaks to anyone, it should be those on lower incomes, because if you give them a tax break, they spend more money. Because they already can't afford everything they want, so they'll spend more. If you give a tax break to someone who's incredibly wealthy, if they spend anything, it won't probably be in this country, but they're unlikely to spend anything because they already have everything they want. You know, when we've got oil companies that sometimes pay negative tax, that means they earn money and we pay them. The Treasury pays them. Some of these oil companies over the last few years have sometimes been paying negative tax. It means they pay no tax and our Treasury gives them money. Bloody ridiculous. You say the FT officially backed no one in 2019. I am telling you, when they write an article that adds on an extra amount to Jeremy Corbyn's spending plans for no good reason, and they had to admit it later, and doesn't explain that Boris Johnson's spending plans would absolutely 100% mean higher taxes and or higher borrowing, which they did, then they were, even if they weren't wanting to sully themselves by officially naming the Conservatives as their pick, they were picking the Conservatives. You don't need a front page with a crown on your leader of choice to be backing a particular party. It's the way you present your articles. Would I agree that Starmer needs a new economic path for Britain? If so, which would I prefer they go move away from finance? Well, whether I think it or not is irrelevant, because they are doing. Again, I cannot emphasise strongly enough just how differently Starmer's Labour are going to be running things. And I don't just mean compared to the Conservatives, I mean compared to Labour. But there's a lot of like this, they're just going to be new Labour 2.0. It's like, well, two things. First of all, Labour 2.0, new Labour 1.0 was not actually a disaster. You know, it was actually very good. there were things I disagreed with, of course, but nonetheless, you cannot complain about it. Public services works, people had access to it, people's incomes went up above, their standard of living went up, their incomes went up above the level of inflation. That's all there is to it. But it's not. They're only thinking that because they've been told not to like Starmer. It's going to be very, very different. But again, I'm just in this sort of mode of, we'll wait and see what it's like. But the way Rachel Reeves has been speaking, like she was in America speaking recently as well, it's not what they're. If they were just going to carry on with the same sort of economics, all they'd be talking about is, right, well, we're going to take away these tax breaks and then we're going to use this to pay for all of these other things. And that would be pretty much it. And now that is what they're focusing on in terms of the public rhetoric, because what they can't do is say to the public, we're going to completely rewrite the rules of economics because, oh, hang on, that sounds scary. But the way it sounds to me is it's going to be incredibly different. And we've started to see a few signs of it. As I say, in PMQs, whether it was the right forum for it or not, who knows? I would suspect not. But announcing that policy that employers are not just allowed to take in foreign workers on 20% lower than the going rate wages, that in itself is a fairly large game changer. I think we're going to see a much better... It won't be the utopia that some people think they will get with a different leader, but I think we're going to see much more effective redistribution of wealth. My main concern is the plans to devolve more decision making around the country, because it has to be done right. Like devolving power to the Scottish Parliament and then the Welsh Parliament and the Northern Irish Assembly, that was one thing because there's still a large focus on it. When it's more regional, it is necessary for local people to be able to make a lot of their own decisions, but are they going to have the right people to make them? Are you going to have the civil service able to support those decisions in place? So there's a lot of things that sound brilliant, but we'll just have to see if they work out. Surely a start is paying everyone above the living wage. So what I would say about that, so people will point to the fact that officially Labour is saying, look, we have to be careful, we can't pay people too much. What I would point people's attention to is some people go, oh, this means Labour won't actually, they're not committing to decent pay rises. It's like, no, they're not. That doesn't mean to say they won't give them. The last Labour opposition, should I say, under Tony Blair, did the same thing. They calmed down talk of big pay rises, but those big pay rises came. I remember as a teacher, it didn't take very long for teachers' pay to go up well above the rate of inflation. It was absolutely massive, the pay rises we got. And the same will have been in other sectors as well. I just knew about it as a teacher because I was a teacher. You were getting very rapid pay rises, pay increases in the scale. So it's even though Blair and Brown didn't promise to do that ahead of their 97 win, they still delivered it. The same thing's going to happen here. In fact, Wes Streeting pretty much said so. He said last week or the week before or something, he said it's the aim of Labour to under-promise and over-deliver, which sounds a bit dodgy because in a tight election, you'd actually want to hype up your promises as much as possible. But such is the position they find themselves in, where they don't have to hype everything up. They can come across as a bit boring, and it's not actually doing their... there's lots of people saying, oh, they need to do this to win, they need to do this, and look at these examples from history, and they had to have this big idea, and it's like, yeah, but it's a bit different at the moment. You have to consider it in the context of things. The Labour have never been against a more dysfunctional Tory party as now. So they just need to persuade people that things will get better under them and they don't have to hype everything up. They are making, as I say, the NHS promises were fairly impressive. They'll no doubt make similar ones in other areas as well. But that is their aim, to under-promise and over-deliver. But there we go. What's a good way to tax wealth rather than income? Well, that is it, and you're asking the wrong person, I'm afraid. That is a question for actually very clever economists. I don't know. I do know that it is incredibly tricky, because a lot of people will say, oh, if we applied a wealth tax, we generate X number of billions of pounds. And it's a little bit like, okay, it's not, we need a wealth tax just because we've allowed wealth to get so out of kilter. We do need a wealth tax. It's not enough now just to have a more sensible income tax system. We do need that as well, but it's not enough on its own. The problem with wealth tax, obviously, for the very wealthy, the way they get out of a lot of it is by going, oh, I don't actually have very much money, you see. It's all tied up in this or that or the other. I can't just chop the west wing off my home, can I now? But then there's another problem as well, in that if you work out let's say you come up with some sensible system to work out a wealth tax, and you base what you think you can raise from it with the wealth that people have declared. Well, the reason why the people have declared that wealth is because it's not being taxed. So they only hide things that are going to be taxed, but the wealthy do hide things that are going to be taxed. So they hide a lot of their income. They arrange their financial operations to hide as much of their income as they can, to pay as little tax as possible. Well, if we have a wealth tax, which Labour have talked positively about, I assume there is one coming of some form, the wealthy will stop declaring it, or they will do what they legally can to avoid declaring it. Bit hard to get away with declaring a house if you live there, admittedly, but you know, so I really don't know exactly how you would do it. What is the best system for doing it? Can we have a link to the poll? Which poll? I may have discussed several polls. Seems that anti-Starmer media channels keep saying he's breaking his pledges. Their spin on this makes him seem untrustworthy. For me, he's being pragmatic due to funding. My thoughts. In reality, most of his what he said during the leadership contest is still intact. There have been some things clearly not, like the freedom of movement. The freedom of movement looms large over all of them. But there's some who've been claiming that he broke them as soon as he made them. So they're not really credible. All I would say is it's not really an issue in terms of it's having no impact on the election, which is why I'm much more comfortable about it now. There are times when someone says a thing and I go, look, that's not true. Blah, 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 blah. I won't just say it's not true, because that does nothing. I get that in my own comments on my own videos. Oh, this isn't true, isn't it? What's not true about it then? So you have to try and say what's not true about it. But again, at this moment, it's quite clear from monitoring Starmer's approval ratings, the reason they're not lighting the sky on fire is just because his personality doesn't allow for it. But they're still solid, and they're still better than other leaders in the same position. And the important thing is they're better than Sunak's. But it is... Uncle Lush was saying, Phil, will Labour introduce tighter regulation of the privatised industries and the financial sector, since Thatcher banks have been ripping off customers for billions? So we know that they are going to introduce tighter regulation for water, because that's quite clearly in those manifesto proposals still. Until the actual manifesto comes out, we can't say for certain, but we know that that is the way they're thinking. And it is an obvious thing as well. Like, if you want to... The thing is, Labour, any government is going to be held responsible for public services. And it's all right, the Tories go, oh, it's a private industry now. Yeah, but you made it that way. But the government still get the blame for it. And Labour will be no different. So they need the public services to work. And the only way you can make them work if you don't run them yourself is to regulate. So inevitably they will. They've talked about specific, very tight regulations for the water industry, for example. But it is a given that they will regulate public services because it is the only way they can make sure that they meet the needs of the public. And they will be held to account for it. If the trains are crap, who do you hold to account for it? The government. If healthcare's crap, the government. Water, government. Energy, government. So the government gets the blame for it anyway, as it should, public services. So if they've privatised it, the only lever you have is regulation. But it also serves a double purpose. Because if you make the regulation sufficiently uncomfortable, then some of those private companies may just find themselves needing to be taken over by the state, just like the rail companies have. But in terms of financial sector, what I would say is I don't know anything specific. They certainly ought to reapply the regulations that the government have been removing of late, because we need to. The first things Reeves and Starmer need to think about is what if there's another pissing banking crisis, because there is one on the horizon potentially. So they need to think to themselves, let's not be glib. Let's not assume we're going to have a few years of global stability here. How are we going to make sure that if there's a global banking crisis, that the economy doesn't tank and we lose the next election? So I would certainly think there needs to be something coming there. M saying about what are they conserving? This would be the Conservatives, I assume. They're just bandits, indeed, and that's the Irish where they get the name from. I missed my comment again. Sorry, there's so many comments on a Saturday. Oh, the poll referred to my description. Oh, yes. I will put it in the description below for people watching not live, but I'll stick it in the chat now as well. It's in the London Economic. For wealth taxes, would it not be prudent to put in laws heavily regulating transfers of cash from UK to tax havens, then put on the tax? Yes. That would certainly be one way. In fact, interestingly, if I segue with the discussion I had with Graham Hughes yesterday on his Labour Social channel. So we were talking about regulation of the media, because the problem we have in this country is that our media is basically owned largely by three people, and they use it to push their own politics rather than report the news. And it would be better if we didn't have that situation. So then it's a case of, how do you introduce reforms that are fair? You can't just say Tories aren't allowed to own the media, but also increase the chances of actually getting news organisations reporting the news. So I would do a few things. First of all, I've said and none of this can come in overnight, but what I would work towards, banning foreign ownership of the media. And the way I would class you as being based in Britain is not simply to have a house in Britain that you stay at now and then. You have to be resident in Britain for 10 months in the year. I see no reason to be allowed more than 2 months business trips. If you need more than that, you don't own the media. Simple. But I also came up with another one in the stream yesterday. I came up with them some time ago, but I haven't mentioned it before, which is ban anyone from owning any media outlets in this country if they have anything to do with tax avoidance schemes. So if they have any of their financial arrangements dealt with by tax havens, if they engage in any tax avoidance at all, doesn't matter whether it's a separate business, because at the moment, like, a lot of our newspapers are based offshore. You know, the Daily Mail is technically not British based. They have their office pissing Cayman Islands or something. But never mind just any, if a person has, no one is allowed a stake in any major British media outlet if any of their financial affairs are managed by tax havens, or even, by tax havens, we'll say. or if they engage in any tax avoidance schemes. I'd also crack down on tax avoidance schemes. Should Labour act pro-EU rejoin? I think so. No, not at the moment. Yes, in time. Not at the moment. At the moment, there's a reason they're not, and I keep going over it. Like, before we left the EU, you could not find more who were the most vocal opponents of Brexit? Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Hilary Benn would be in there as well. I would say these were the three really. There were many others as well who openly talked against it, but those were huge. They were making speeches all over the place. Keir Starmer, pushing for a people's vote in both Parliament and outside Parliament. And two of those people are right at the top of the Labour leadership team. And all of the major leadership team were anti-Brexit and clearly anti-Brexit, no equivocation, despite having a leader that was going, oh, people's will. So it is inconceivable that they've suddenly turned into Brexiteers. What they have done is realise that we've now left the EU, so they cannot just now argue for a referendum on staying because we've gone. So, and they also know we cannot just rejoin. They can't, what do they do? If they say we should rejoin the EU after they've lost the election, what would we do? We can't rejoin the EU. Even if they win the election, we can't. The EU would say, no, you don't meet the requirements to join. Sorry. Why don't you go away and meet the requirements to join? And the biggest requirement to join is for the issue to be politically settled. So actually, it doesn't matter what any party says. Any party that thinks we can just rejoin the EU just because the Conservatives are out of power is a liar, because the Conservatives can come back into power. So what we actually need to do is make sure the Conservatives are on board with it. And for those who think, well, that's never going to happen, yes, it is. It will happen as soon as the British public, the ones who determine who wins certain elections, as soon as they demand that we go back to the EU, we will go back to the EU, or we will apply. Still up to the EU, yes. But we will apply at that point. And that may not be as far away as you think, because I want you to consider three things that will change over the next few years. First of all, as people become more distant from the referendum, it naturally becomes less painful to accept that it was a mistake. And not just that, it's like we're almost at the cusp of enough people feeling it was a mistake now in this country, that we just need people to now accept that, well, when you make a mistake, if there's a way to reverse it, why wouldn't you? Only it's not really reversing it, because we can never go back to what we had. We can go forwards to become an EU member, but with a different arrangement. We cannot get all the opt-outs we had. But the other thing to bear in mind, what's going to happen? Labour are going to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. So straight away, that changes the voting dynamic. And I know young people do not vote in very large numbers, but they still vote. It's not like you only get one or two. It's like, I think the 18 to 24-year-olds at the last election, it was about 40% of them, which is a minority, but it's still, it's still a decent number. So you add 16 and 17-year-olds into the mix as well. It's just that bit extra. And then, now, because Labour have been a bit coy about exactly what the policy is, we don't really know. But the idea that they're also going to give the vote in general elections to EU citizens with settled status. Now, we don't know exactly which ones. Will it be all of them? Will it be some? Would you have had to stay here for 10 years or something? But what that still represents is millions of extra votes, and votes that are probably not pro-Tory, and votes that are certainly not pro-Brexit. So basically, Keir Starmer, there is every chance he is going to create millions of new voters, inject millions of new voters into the system who are by and large pro-EU. So all of the, if you look at what Labour are doing in terms of their policies that have an impact on Brexit, there are some policies that have a direct impact on Brexit. The Daily Telegraph are currently trying to trash one. Keir Starmer's talking about renegotiating a deal to make it easier to export goods. The Daily Telegraph go, no, the EU have already ruled this out. And it's a bit like and I've seen plenty of rejoiners bandying this about as proof that Labour are onto the wrong path. And it's like, well, first of all, are you aware you're promoting a pro-Brexit article to back your argument up? How mad is that? But second of all, the Telegraph article is not entirely accurate as well, because there are some things Labour can do that will ease things. Now, obviously, outside the single market and the customs union, you're limited. We're always going to have that paperwork. There are certain goods we won't be able to export at all, like goods that need a health certificate. If what we're trying to export doesn't cost enough, is not of enough value to be worth the health certificate, we still won't be able to do that. Doesn't matter what Keir Starmer can negotiate, he can't negotiate any way out of that. But there are things he can negotiate. But also just laying the groundwork for the following election, just making the electorate more pro-European. And it's not rigging the system, it's just introducing more people who will be eligible to vote. People who live in this country and pay taxes in this country. Why shouldn't they vote? This would be like in the days before universal suffrage, or before women got the vote, say. People at the time probably argued, giving women the vote would be rigging the system in favour of the parties that appeal more to women. All right? That's not rigging the system. That is increasing the number of people who live and work in this country who can vote. So what Labour are definitely doing is laying the groundwork for them to be able to present a more pro-EU manifesto at the next election. Wendy's saying there, how would a political party attract 16, 17-year-olds to vote? Does anyone really know what a teenager wants, even a teenager? Well, see, in a way, it doesn't even matter, because politicians, unfortunately, the bugger of it is for young people is, see, a lot of young people will say, well, I'm not going to vote. Why should I? No one's really offering me anything. And that's true, they're not. But the reason they're not, and I used to say to my students all the time, the reason they're not is because you don't vote in large enough numbers. If you voted in much larger numbers, they would, because they'd have to. At the moment, Labour, for example, are targeting two groups of voters. They're targeting like the middle-aged blokes who are reasonably well off, own their own homes, but they don't have like formal education. They just got good jobs elsewhere, and single 40-something-year-old mothers who aren't interested in politics. Those seem to be, according to reports, two of their key demographics to target. Not young people, never be young people, because they don't vote in large enough numbers. But it doesn't really matter, because some 16 or 17-year-olds will vote, and 16 or 17-year-olds in general are not likely to vote Conservative. It doesn't matter how the spread of votes goes, although it is likely to be more Labour than even Greens and Lib Dems, but it doesn't matter, because Labour are not in competition with the Greens and Lib Dems in general elections. They are in local elections, but in general elections, they're only in competition with the Conservatives and the SNP. Those are the only two parties that Labour has to appeal more to the young. Now, in Scotland, will they do that, the SNP? Maybe not. Maybe not. That all depends. The young people in Scotland are much more likely to be pro-independence as well. So maybe they take a hit there. But there are far more seats in England where Labour are just competing with the Conservatives, and Labour will win way more votes from the 16 to 17-year-olds than the Conservatives. And that's all that matters. It doesn't matter whether Labour would get more than the Liberal Democrats or the Greens in any particular seat. All they care about is, will we get more than the Conservatives? And the answer will be yes. And the same applies to EU citizens with settled status. It doesn't matter if more of them would vote Green or Lib Dem. Are they more likely to vote Labour or the Conservatives? Because again, in almost every target seat, Labour are in direct competition with the Conservatives. That is their main opponent. Whereas the Conservatives, you know, I always say the Conservatives have this huge advantage in not only having the media on their side, but the fact that Labour have the vote split between themselves, Lib Dems, Greens, Plaid, SNP, you know, whatever else. Whereas until the Brexit Party came along, or until UKIP came along, I suppose, to a certain extent, they didn't really have their own vote split. They have the vote split with the Lib Dems in the centre, but that was strictly in the centre. They didn't really have it split anywhere else. But one advantage that Labour have over the Conservatives, it's a fairly slim one, but it is still an advantage, is Labour can mostly focus on a single message that is designed to target people who flip between Labour and the Conservatives. Whereas the Conservatives, some of their marginals are between themselves and Labour, some others are between themselves and the Lib Dems. And it's a very different offer to each of those groups of people. Admittedly, Labour's position is caused... I've seen a few reports with Scottish Labour not necessarily happy because UK Labour is adopting a very focused message towards the sort of people who flip between Labour and the Conservatives. That's not helping Scottish Labour, who need the sort of voters who flip between the SNP and Labour. But then the beauty of having a separate Scottish Labour Party is they can sort of... They're going to have to stand on the same manifesto, but they can present different rhetoric, so they shouldn't really complain too much. Wouldn't 16 and 17-year-olds be more easily... I'm not sure what that word is, but led by Tory bullshit? No, they won't fall for it. Not because they're cleverer than we think. No, of course they're not. When you're a teenager, you are stupid. I was incredibly stupid when I was incredibly stupid all the way up until I was about in my early 30s, in fact. No, 16, 17-year-olds are idiots. I'm sorry if you're 16 or 17-year-olds, but you are an idiot. And when you're 30, you'll look back and realise you were an idiot. But what are they going to appeal to them for? Labour can go, we're going to build up public services. We are going to build up education. We've got to focus on education. They've got to focus on the climate control. What's the Tories offer? Let's go down them, shall we? Oh, we're going to grow GDP. What's GDP? Never you mind. Oh, okay. We're going to reduce inflation. What's inflation? Never mind. We're going to reduce the national debt. What's national debt? Never mind. Because we don't teach anyone any of these things. We're going to cut NHS waiting lists. Oh, good show. I'm young. I don't often need the NHS. Oh, bollocks. We're going to stop the boats. Why would we stop the boats? Well, because we're going to stop people coming over to this country, all these foreigners coming to this country. I like foreigners. Pavel's one of my best mates. I ain't got a problem. You know, so what have the Tories got to offer 16 and 17-year-olds? There's a reason. The young Conservatives are struggling for members. The Conservatives are actually losing support amongst young people because they're not doing anything for them, not standing for anything. In fact, they're standing against the things that appeal to young people, like the climate emergency, for example, like redistribution of wealth. Because bear in mind, today's 16 and 17-year-olds, right? When I was 16 and 17-year-olds, right, my parents, that generation, the boomer generation, right, they... were all aspirational. Oh, you do this, you get yourself on that, you go to university. Even though they didn't go to university, I was the first in my family to go to university, but it was all aspirational then. You're going to go to university, you're going to get this good job. They weren't happy when I became a teacher, by the way. You're going to get this good job. You're going to get on the housing ladder. It's going to be brilliant. You're going to retire when you're 55. It'd be marvellous. Whereas the current 16 and 17-year-olds, their parents are the ones who couldn't get onto the housing ladder. So they're now paying massive rents because they couldn't get onto the housing ladder. They're the ones who, are looking at having to retire when they're... Ian Duncan Smith wants people to retire when they're 75 now. He wants them, you're going to have to bung up They're already looking at retiring at 67. It's going to be 68. It's going to keep going up. By the time, my generation, which are the ones who've got the 16, 17-year-old kids... By the time they're, the parents of these kids are going, the Tories are shit. The Tories are absolute arseheads. They're costing me a fortune. It's all right, your granny saying It's all right listening to your granny saying how wonderful Boris is. Boris is an arsehole. So those kids have got the parents who are not impressed at all with capitalism because it's not done them any favours. And they've got the climate emergency to deal with as well. Em saying, I was certainly more stupid as a teen. I'm closer to 13 than 20 now, though I've been watching my channel for a while. It's helped me gain political wisdom. The thing is, and people don't realise this, is the human brain is quite impressive, but it takes an awful long time to develop. It basically takes about 30 years. So you don't reach intellectual maturity until your late 20s. It varies, obviously, from person to person. But you don't reach intellectual maturity until your late 20s. And yet you're considered legally an adult. And obviously we can't consider like a 26-year-old a child. No society can sensibly do that. But, you know, your brain isn't fully cooked until you are in your late 20s. Which means you are going to be... if you do anything stupid after you're 30, then that is just down to you. You are just an idiot. But, you know, any time up to that, of course you're going to do stupid things. Of course, you know... And this is why university is such a nightmare, really. It's such a terrible system, going to university at 18. Because when your brain is at its most unstable, you are encouraged to leave home and go to a place where you are your own boss, you're going to manage your own budgets, and you are encouraged to drink on a regular basis. What could go wrong? What could go wrong? What they should have done, certainly should have done it in my case, is they should actually stop you going to university at 18. They should say, no, you're going to go to work. You go, I don't care what it is, don't have to be national service, could be anything, but you get conscripted into a workplace. You're going to do some work, be responsible. Then when you're 24, go to university. When you've grown up a bit. But anyway, never mind. But just because teenagers are not necessarily going to be the sharpest tools in the box doesn't mean that, you know, they're not going to vote Conservative, because the Conservatives make no offer to them. They don't offer anything to them. You know, it's all nonsense. There's like no effort. In fact, at the moment, they're not going to win any... How are they going to win support from 16 and 17-year-olds? They're campaigning against it. When Labour introduced the legislation to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, who's going to be opposing it? The Conservatives. If you're a 16-year-old, are you going to think to yourself, oh, I'll vote Conservatives, the people who want to take away my... or who want to block my ability to vote? No, of course not. Funny hearing... Increase of retirement 75. Think about the French public response to increase to a juvenile 64. Well, exactly. This is what I mean. The difference between France and Britain. You know, I keep saying it's not. I'm not going to say one's better than the other. There needs to be a happy medium, because in this country we just accept. That even though we know it's bullshit and it's not what the government promised. Even people who vote Conservative get a Conservative government, and then the Conservative government doesn't deliver what they promised. They don't riot or anything or protest. They just grumble. They go, oh, bloody thing. They promised to do this and they didn't do it. Well, are you going to vote for someone else at the next election? Well, we'll see. You're not, are you? No, I'm not. Whereas in France, they set fire to their own city. It's like, can we have somewhere in between? Can we maybe, just maybe, have a society that doesn't set fire to their own streets? Because that's your own street. You're literally shitting on your own doorstep. Can we just have a society where when the government doesn't do what it said it would do, you protest, you arrange massive protests against your local MP until they do something. And at the next election, if they haven't sorted it, you vote for someone else. Can we not just do that? That's much. And it means no one has to clear up a big fiery mess in the middle of the street. I'm saying that. Spent 5 years at FE colleges and had a year not doing much of anything. I went to university. I don't think alcohol. You don't drink alcohol, so that wasn't really a problem for me. Yeah, I drank alcohol. I don't drink very much these days, and I drank at the time. In fact, I was incredibly stupid with it. But there we go. Right, we've gone past the time, so we'll get to go to the last few in a bit. I'm 26, raised in a DUP/Tory household, now fighting for a Labour government and Irish reunification. But it often does. I mean, you'll think about these things. I mean, I grew up in a conservative household. I was never going to be a conservative at any point. And that's all there is to it. Do I know if Labour have policies on education reform? I would add politics to the curriculum from year nine, instead of having to wait until college or uni. I don't know about that. I'm not sure they're talking about changing the national curriculum at all. But I also have to say, Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, I don't really think she's much comp. I don't think she's very good at presenting much, I have to say. I've not seen very much in terms of educational reform. I'm sure there will be, and if I look it up, I'm sure I'll find it. But I do have to say, Bridget Phillipson, she was made the Shadow Education Secretary, because she was like being picked out as a potential leader for the future. I don't rate her, I have to say. I wish what would have happened instead is that Wes Streeting had been moved to education and Rosina Allen Khan had been made the Shadow Health Secretary. I would have preferred that. But there it is. Starmer said he won't reverse or reform Anti-Protest Act. No, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. He says he won't commit to repealing it. He didn't say he wouldn't reform it. What he said was he's going to let it bed in. He said he wants to see what the effect of police guidance is, and then they will decide what to do about it. So he did not at all say he won't reform it. Not even a hint that they won't reform it. He said he won't repeal the bill, but that is because he said there are some things in the bill that are worth keeping. But they will reform it. What he's waiting to see is because if you reform it with primary legislation, you amend the act, then that takes parliamentary time, and it's parliamentary time you cannot then use to make people's lives better, which is not only going to help. Remember, most people are not getting arrested for protesting. And I'm not saying it's all right because there's only so many people that protest. It's not all right. But there are way more people starving. So it's like, what do we spend the parliamentary time on? And if all that's needed to stop the acts being a problem until they can deal with it years down the line, if all that's needed is for Yvette Cooper, who will be the Home Secretary at the time, to basically tell the police, you do not arrest people for the following. In other words, if Yvette Cooper effectively amends the act with like guidance or secondary legislation, which she can do without bothering Parliament, then why wouldn't you do that? That's the thing. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there because we have very much run out of time. I'm trying to do this last one because you're baiting me. Starmer doesn't care about the climate crisis or, it seems, democracy. He's literally got a platform of giving power away from Westminster. He's literally devolving power away from Westminster. That is giving more people more democratic control. He's also literally going to expand the voting population by giving 16 and 17-year-olds the vote and talking in very positive terms about giving EU citizens the vote. That is incredibly pro-democracy. As for the climate emergency, they are committing to a massive level of investment in the green revolution that is to come. This is an absolute nonsense of a comment. But anyway, there we go. Starmer ate my hamster, yes. Okay. Have a good evening, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you later.